Welcome to Chapter 4 of our Civil War unit, Growth of Anti-Slavery Feeling. A positive good. In the late 1700s, slave owners, including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, were moved by the Declaration of Independence to free their slaves. By the early 1800s, however, slave owners no longer felt that slavery was a bad thing, and even Northerners cared less. Some even argued that slavery was in fact a good thing for slaves because they were inferior people. Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina said, "But I take higher ground. I hold that in the present state of civilization, where two races of different origin, and distinguished by color and other physical differences, as well as intellectual, are brought together, the relation now existing in the slaveholding states between the two is, instead of an evil, a good, a positive good." What he meant by that is that he thought because African American people, in his opinion, were lesser people, they were not capable of being intelligent, or at least as intelligent as white Americans, that they needed to be cared for as slaves because that's the best they could expect in life. That is a sad and dark part of American history right there. Abolitionists. Instead, a small group of people began to organize to abolish slavery. They became known as abolitionists. Some of the earliest abolitionists actually originated in England in the early 1800s. William Wilberforce was an important abolitionist who helped to ban slavery in England in 1833. They would hold rallies, lead protests, pass out pamphlets, etc., to help raise awareness about the evils of slavery. Many of the abolitionists were inspired by their religious beliefs, citing the Bible as the number one source against slavery. While Northerners in general agreed with them, some believed that abolitionists were troublemakers, and mobs even formed at some of their rallies. If you want to learn more about William Wilberforce, I recommend watching the movie Amazing Grace. William Lloyd Garrison. He lived from 1805 until 1879. He joined the anti-slavery movement at the age of 25 when he read the book Letters on Slavery by Reverend John Rakin. He initially supported the American Colonization Society that wanted to set up a separate colony where African Americans could escape from slavery. He was inspired by his faith. Garrison believed that slavery was a sin that needed to be cleansed from the face of the earth. In 1831, he founded the anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator. In the paper, he described the cruelties of slavery and urged readers to work to end it. In 1833, he founded the American Anti-Slavery Society. Below is an excerpt from William Lloyd Garrison's paper, The Liberator. Quote, "I am aware that many object to the severity of my language, but is there not cause for severity? I will be as harsh as truth, and as uncompromising as justice. On this subject, I do not wish to think or speak or write with moderation. No, no! Tell a man whose house is on fire to give a moderate alarm. Tell him to moderately rescue his wife from the hands of the ravisher. Tell the mother to gradually extricate her baby from the fire into which it has fallen. But urge me not to use moderation in a cause like the president. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch. And I will be heard. The apathy of the people is enough to make every statue leap from its pedestal and to hasten the resurrection of the dead." End quote. From 1831. He was so passionate about abolition that he said, if you want me to be calm about this, then tell everyone else in an extreme emergency to be just as soft-spoken and calm as you're asking me to be. Would you do that? No, that would be ridiculous. Frederick Douglass. He lived from 1818 until 1895. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery in the state of Maryland. He switched masters several times during his time as a slave. In 1838, he successfully escaped from slavery by disguising himself as a free black sailor and rode a train to an abolitionist house in New York. He befriended William Lloyd Garrison and became an important leader in the anti-slavery movement. He spent much of his time going on speaking tours, telling the horrors of his early life as a slave. He became a close friend of Abraham Lincoln, but they didn't always agree on all subjects, especially how quickly slaves should be freed and granted full rights, including the right to vote. On the life of Frederick Douglass. This book was published in 1845. While Douglass would go on to write many memoirs and autobiographies, the narrative on the life of Frederick Douglass is by far the most popular and influential. It primarily described his early life as a slave in Maryland. Some Southerners doubted its authenticity, saying that there was no way a slave could be educated enough to write it. They also argued that the stories were made up and that slave owners were never as harsh as he described. While criticized by Southerners, it still managed to help inspire many abolitionists and free African Americans. And we are currently reading it now, today, in 2020. The Underground Railroad. In the early 1800s, a network was set up to help slaves escape from slavery. Secret routes were established that were connected by safe houses. Guides, known as conductors, would help plan and lead the slaves' escape, often risking being caught and arrested or even killed. While slaves were technically free once they reached the North, most of the routes went out of the country to either Canada or Mexico, where slavery was already illegal, to make sure they were safe. Because of fugitive slave laws, even though slaves were free once they reached the North, if caught, they had to be returned to slavery, so many left the country for their own safety. Harriet Tubman. She lived from 1822 until 1913. She was born into slavery and actually suffered from severe headaches because of the beating she received as a child. In 1849, with the passing of her master, she escaped from slavery thanks to the Underground Railroad. 1 year after being freed, Tubman joined the Underground Railroad as a conductor. She returned to the South 19 times, risking the possibility of getting caught and being returned to slavery. Over those 19 trips, she rescued 300 slaves, and a reward of $12,000 was posted for her capture. She earned the nickname Moses for freeing so many slaves. Below is a map of the routes along the Underground Railroad. As you can see, many of the routes eventually lead into Canada, while a few, including ones in our home state of Texas, go down to Mexico. Both of these countries, if you remember, had already banned slavery, and in those countries, slaves were protected from the fugitive slave laws. Below is a collage of many different abolitionists throughout this period. As you can see, it is a good mix of men and women, both white and black. All of these people worked hard to eventually end slavery. Take a look through and read some of the names. Summary. As slavery became more accepted by the American public, a group came together called the Abolitionists. They worked to end slavery throughout the United States. Make sure you have gone through and written down all the terms in your packet and the summary. Do not worry about the warm-up question.